Hi, I hope everything is going well. Uh, since I was sick, unfortunately, I couldn't make it to class. It was really literally impossible. We'll be doing this lecture online. I'll just record the lecture itself, and then you can take a look at it on your own time. I think this is probably the best solution moving forward for class 11. So let's get started on that. There will actually be several parts just because the recorder that I'm using tends to kind of bug out after about 10 minutes. So I'll be doing it every about 10 minutes or so. I'll be changing. I'll stop the recording and start over again. So just don't forget that your projects are due next class. We'll be starting the review next class. And the class after will be continuing the review, answering some last minute questions, and doing your presentations. Yeah, that's it. So the plan for yesterday was supposed to be to basically go over Tannenbaum and Schmidt. Um, and that's really what I'll be focusing on today in the online presentation, since that's the most important thing for your final exam. When Tannenbaum and Schmidt have come up on final exams in the past, usually it is combined with another theory on leadership or management style. So I guess the first question that we want to open up with is, are leaders born? When we think of greatest leaders that have existed either in our lifetimes or lifetimes of our parents' times or grandparents' times, we ask ourselves, are these leaders natural born leaders, or have they been influenced by their environment or their society? Well, of course, it's a little bit of A and a little bit of B, and we've discussed it many times before in class that it's not just a matter of personality, but you can also learn how to become a better leader, more charismatic leader. It is something that can be learned over time and with practice and patience. But we also have to think about the fact that, depending on the environment at hand, a certain leader's natural tendencies maybe have more success than another leader. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more going forward. But you have a natural leadership tendencies. Every person has their own natural tendencies, and depending on the environment, certain leader, just because of their natural tendencies, may be better suited for a certain environment or situation. So just classically, there are some leadership theories that are trait based, that you're born a leader or you're not, and that traits are important. Obviously, we can accept this, that charisma, high energy, the ability to motivate people to move, the ability to motivate people not to move, sorry, the ability to motivate people to follow you. These are important traits, of course. There are also the behavioral leadership theories, which ask the question that do successful leaders behave in a certain way? And again, traditionally speaking, we would think that great successful leaders are consistent, have integrity, and honesty, of course. And these are, of course, important behavioral traits that are associated with great leaders. But finally, kind of one of the most recent theories, and I guess the theory that we'll be discussing today, is the contingency situational leadership theories, as presented by Tannenbaum and Schmidt. And it really asks the question from another perspective: is what does a successful leadership depend on? So what are the factors that leadership depends on? And this is what we're going to talk about with Tannenbaum and Schmidt on leadership. So as always, the pictures of these men. I guess there's only men that we've been discussing, and here they are. It's supposed to be kind of a joke, but my voice is monotone. So I guess the old problem is, how do we lead the followers? And the new problem becomes, when should a decision be made by the leader, and when should we really ask our employees for advice? When should employees be consulted? And the reality is that it does depend, right? There's like a lot of the things that you'll be talking about in the next few years in business school. It depends. It depends on many factors. Forces, and according to the Tannenbaum and Schmidt, depends on three forces: forces in the manager, forces in the subordinates or non-managers, and finally the forces in the situation. And we'll talk about those in a bit. So here's a concept map. And what you see here is, on the left-hand side, you have the style of leadership that is centered, kind of the authoritarian style of leadership, where the manager takes the decision and then announces it. This is my decision, and that's the way it's going to be. Let's move forward. On the right side of this concept map, we see subordinate-centered leadership. Excuse me. Subordinate-centered leadership, where basically, and at the extreme right of the subordinate-centered leadership, is where basically the manager opens pretty much the floor completely and permits subordinates to function within the limits defined by his superior or her superiors. So pretty much giving the subordinates a complete carte blanche to do to work within whatever limits he or she was given by the subordinates. So it's basically two complete opposites. On one end, there's use of the manager is completely utilizing his or her authority, and on that's on the left side, on the boss-centered side. On the right side, it's basically the decisions are being made with more freedom given to subordinates, and they're being compromised throughout, right? So as you move from left to right, the authority and the decisions are being made less by the management and more by the subordinates, and vice versa. Now, on an exam situation, if you were asked a question on Tannenbaum and Schmidt, the most important thing to understand would be to kind of choose an area along this curve, along this map, and try to find evidence for it. And the best way to find evidence would be to basically use the forces of the manager, forces of the subordinates, and forces of the situation. Now, of course, if you look at the forces, you're not going to tell for sure if it's, for example, manager presents ideas and invites questions, or manager presents tentative discussion subject to change. So those are two very close to each other. So unless you can find in the text a specific example where the manager presents the ideas and invites questions, you won't necessarily be able to recommend that specific point on the continuum. But what you could do is say, if you think it's around there, you could say that it's close to the middle ground between boss-centered and subordinate-centered, and you can assume that it's where the manager presents ideas and invites questions. So on the exam, you might not have an exact, you might not have the perfect answer. You might, by doing the analysis of the forces of the manager, forces of the subordinates, and forces of the situation, basically what you're going to determine is if it's more boss-centered leadership or more subordinate-centered leadership. You won't necessarily know where exactly it is in the continuum. You might have to make some educated guesses as to where it would be exactly in the continuum. Again, just to repeat that, in case it was unclear, after doing the analysis of your forces of manager, forces of subordinates, forces of the situation, you won't know exactly where it is on the map unless it's clear from the text that there's a clear piece of evidence. So what would you have to do? Well, you'd have to kind of extrapolate and figure it out. But what the forces of the manager, subordinates, and situation will tell you is whether it's more boss-centered or whether it's more subordinate-centered. And the rest would be up to you to kind of make a good case for where you think they fall along that line. Obviously, as always, make your evidence as clear as possible. So some key questions, as they are in the text of Tannenbaum and Schmidt. So if the subordinates make the decision, is the manager responsible? Well, the answer is, of course, the manager is responsible. Delegating decision-making does not necessarily mean, or does not necessitate, that you're also delegating responsibility, right? The manager is the manager because they are responsible. At the end of the day, the buck stops at the manager. So the manager is always responsible. And the employee should understand that. What role should managers play? Is it a member of the team making the decision? When we're doing it more of a subordinate-based leadership, should a manager kind of be part of it, or as an authority figure? Well, if the manager believes that that they would have some value to add, and often in this day and age, a lot of the jobs are highly technical, and you would assume that a manager has some of these technical abilities. So if a manager might have something of value to add during team discussions or group discussions, then the manager should make it clear that he or she sees themselves as part of the group and therefore as a member. If, on the other hand, they don't believe that they would add any value, then they should just take a step back and let the discussions happen amongst the other members. Should subordinates be able to tell what style the manager is using at the moment or at the time? The answer is yes. It should be very clear what style the manager is using, whether it's boss centered or subordinate centered leadership. You don't want the employees to think that you're kind of doing a very democratic style of leadership, only then to have the world kind of them to be blindsided and you making the decision completely on your own. So the answer is yes. It's better to make it clear to the subordinates, because you don't want to basically mask some type of authoritarian leadership by pretending to be democratic. Because what you'll have at the end of the day is your employees are not going to be happy, and there will be recourse. The last question is based on the idea of can you measure a manager's democracy by looking at how many decisions the subordinates make? And the quick answer is no. It's not about the sheer number of decisions that the manager or the subordinates are making, but instead it's the importance of these decisions. If the subordinates are making lots of little decisions that are insignificant, then it's not necessarily a true measure of the manager's democracy. So be aware of that. It's more about the importance of the decisions rather than the sheer number and volume of decisions. So I'm going to put a stop to this, and then we're going to continue by looking once again at the concept map on a new video. Thank you.